the union organizer and say, oh, by the way, can I have my card back? But that it opens up those employees to the maximum degree of intimidation, coercion, but misrepresentation. Under the secret ballot election, an election is called, the employees hear from both sides, and then there is a final vote that's made in the privacy of the voting booth.
What the unions have said, though, is that under the current system, the secret ballot system still, companies are intimidating workers into not joining the union by firing or changing positions of people who are agitating for the union.
Under the statistics from the National Labor Relations Board, in hard cases, that occurs, and again, it's illegal and it's wrong, it shouldn't happen, but it occurs in less than 3% of instances. Now, I know that Rick quotes other data that comes from, from union-controlled sources, but in terms of the hard data of proven cases, it only happens in 3% of instances. So I don't think that that's a serious criticism of the existing system.
Just to go to your point about my union-controlled sources for my facts, and here are the facts. In 78 years, there's been 42 citations against labor unions for intimidation, 42, where the union was fined and cited by the National Labor Relations Board for violating the law. In 2007 alone, there were 29,000 citations against employers where they were found guilty. That's the point of the citation. Those facts didn't come from a union-controlled association. As a matter of fact, they came from the HR Policy Association, which I noticed today released a report countering some of the stuff we said about union workers making more than non-union workers, because they are HR policy people. So it's not. And to their credit, I'll give them, they did this research thinking they were going to be able to find that employers and unions were intimidating as much as, equally. And to their credit, they released the facts that it was in 78 years, 42 citations against unions, 29,000 in 1 year against employers.
Well,
so those aren't my statistics.
For the last 2 decades, the union membership in the United States of America has been declining. Last year there was an increase, and when you look at those increased numbers, many of them came in government jobs, which is probably another story in and of itself. But when you look at Canada, for instance, that has the card check system that you're talking about, unionization rates there in the provinces that have it are 3 times higher than in the U.S. So for the unions, for the major unions of this country, like AFL-CIO, the Teamsters, SEIU, this is potentially a bonanza. Don't you look at it that way? You are potentially going to see thousands of companies across this country unionize.
Which is a good thing for those workers. I mean, look at Canada. They're not suffering the same level of the recession that we are, because they have unions that provide checks and balances in their financial systems. So when you have unions, you have pushback against greed.
Canada's not suffering from the recession because they have more unions?
Again,
is that true?
This is the hard truth. Big labor is a dinosaur. And it's going the way of the Detroit automakers, who again are facing their current fate largely because of the giveaways and the control that the UAW has over the operations of that business. It's the same thing that happened with Bethlehem Steel and why they're not around anymore.
Well, Rick, let me ask you about that, because that is a concern that you hear out there. Labor costs alone make GM cars $1,400 more expensive than Toyotas, and that was based on 2006 figures. If you have a union, there are higher costs involved. The amount of pay that they get is higher in many instances than it is in companies that are not unionized.
And that's a good thing. I mean, I don't know when we got to the point where we got proud of paying our workers crap wages. We had these guys from Tennessee bragging about the fact that they paid their workers less than other places.
Well, just to correct me on that point, though, the automakers, the transplants, the foreign companies, the BMWs and Volkswagens and Hondas and Toyotas, they're paying their guys, $40 an hour, but the UAW guys are getting $70-some an hour.
And
wages plus benefits.
No, it's not even that. It's man-hour costs, and if you study the auto industry, the man-hour costs for a Toyota in America, because they don't have health care. That's dealt with through the Japanese government, and they have their issues for dealing with health care. Same with the German automakers. So they don't have all the health care costs and the legacy costs, the pensions, because they haven't been here as long. But the man-hour costs, which it goes into making a car, is almost exactly the same for Toyota. What the New York Times reporter got wrong on that story, and we're digressing from the right to, why unions are good, but the New York Times guy got it wrong because he heard during bargaining that man-hour cost for a GM was $78. Well, that includes what it costs to put in the drinking fountain on the shop floor, what it costs to bring the water into the drinking fountain. Those are all costs associated with making a car. Not the average Detroit auto worker we saw later actually made $26 an hour compared to the guy in Tennessee
who made $24. That is a separate conversation as well. But let's get back to the central issue. I think that if you go to a car check system, the business community is saying you will have more unionized companies, you will have more companies that are not able to compete globally. If you look at the so-called right-to-work states, the states that have unions but you're not forced to join them and you don't have to pay dues, they point to numbers like 1.43 million, 1.5 million more jobs were created in those states. In the states that do have union protections, union laws, you saw a decline of 2 million jobs. Those are the kind of figures that people look at and wonder, will this be to the detriment of our economy at a time when we're in this precarious financial position? Let me let David respond first.
Next year the U.S. Census will be conducted, and that Pennsylvania, again, is going to lose another seat in Congress. We'll be down to 18 members of the Pennsylvania House delegation, and that'll be the smallest representation for PA since Thomas Jefferson was president. Something is seriously wrong when Pennsylvania has job growth, wage growth, and population growth so far below the national average. And when you just compare that with our neighbors, with Virginia and North Carolina, that are right-to-work states, that have a less hostile labor climate, that have limits on lawsuit abuse, that there's regulatory sanity, that the radical Greens aren't completely in control, that those states enjoy a more robust economy and a more dynamic quality of life, and that's why they are gaining population and why they will have additional representation in Congress. It's part of the long-term decline of Pennsylvania that we have such a hostile labor climate, and that the card check bill will essentially extend that across the rest of the country.
A hostile labor climate costing us here in Pennsylvania?
Absolutely.
A hostile labor climate costing us here in Pennsylvania?
Absolutely not. I'd say it has more to do with our weather than it has to do with the hostile labor climate, because when you have a skilled, trained workforce in Pennsylvania, when companies find that they can't find that same thing in other parts of the country or in Mexico, they've come back to Pennsylvania. When states do giveaways like North Carolina did when they attracted our garment industry in South Carolina, they went after the low-wage jobs, and what they found out is for those companies who want to pursue low wages and low pay, those jobs will go. They went from here to South Carolina to Guatemala to Mexico to China. There are companies who will only chase.
In 2009, that the card check is going to bring more union workers and therefore more jobs to Pennsylvania. How does card check grow our economy? Make that argument right now.
Well, it keeps